What are we doing in Mexico? What is the United States' role in Mexico in the war against the drug cartels? We will be having an additional hearing talking about what's happening on the U.S. side of the border. I would argue that you can distinguish between spillover crime and spillover violence. I think the fact that 450 drug cartel associates were arrested in the United States directly after the murder of Agent Zapata signifies that spillover crime is in fact here, and they are here in the United States. With that, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Alvarez, you supervise Agent Zapata. You're Agent Avila's supervisor, Avila's supervisor. We've talked before this hearing, and I've discussed what happened that fateful day with you and Agent Avila. I know you can't get into the details of what occurred that fateful day, but can you describe to this committee and to the American people what the threat level is really like in Mexico, and what ICE agents and DEA agents and FBI agents go through on a day-by-day basis in terms of the threat level?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Having been down there for 5 years, I can personally tell you, and also in discussions with my agents down in Mexico, it's a difficult work environment. They are constantly looking out for their safety, their surroundings. There's a risk of or a very difficult working environment down there. Their families, they're concerned about their family members. From the time you wake up in the morning till the time you go to sleep. It's a very uncomfortable work environment. Nonetheless, they come down there prepared. We do provide them training before they deploy. The U.S. Embassy also provides, at least they provide some sort of security briefings for the family members, for the agents as they operate in Mexico. It's a very difficult work environment, as I mentioned. Nonetheless, the cooperation level with the Mexican government has been terrific throughout the years. Since I got down there in 2000 to we are today, the cooperation has been excellent. Unfortunately, I think the violence has increased. Nonetheless, I think the risk level has increased tremendously also. One of the problems that we face now is trying to recruit ICE agents to actually go down to Mexico and work on our behalf. It's getting more and more difficult as a result of the increased violence.
And we certainly want to make sure that you're protected down there. If we're going to put you in harm's way into a war zone, we want to make sure you're adequately protected, you have the resources you need. I can only imagine. And talking to Agent Avila, he mentioned how he left Mexico City to come back into the United States, and the stress level just totally decompressed. You're on constant high alert every day. And I think the exhibit that's on the screen today, which is the vehicle that Agent Avila and Zapata were riding in that fateful day, demonstrates how violent the situation has become down there. If you look at this vehicle, which is a highly secure vehicle, over 80 rounds from an AK-47 were fired at this vehicle. It looks like something out of like a Bonnie and Clyde movie, and this is real, and that's what's happening in Mexico. That takes me to Mr. Nichols and Mr. Mora. Let me say to Mr. Nichols first, we worked very hard on the Merida initiative, and I appreciate your efforts, but over 2 years since we passed that critical legislation with $1.5 billion, I must express my disappointment that only 25% of that funding has gone down to Mexico for the intended purpose, particularly given the increased level of violence and threats in Mexico. But having said that, the fundamental question of this hearing is, what is our plan down there? And what is our strategy down there? Mr. Nichols, State Department is basically, you're in charge of what the mission is in Mexico. And I have to be honest with you, it's a little, it doesn't seem very comprehensive. It doesn't appear to be, it's hard to tell what the strategy really is, other than throwing ICE agents down there and DEA. We have State Department officials. But I would like to know from you, what is our plan, what is our mission, what is our objective? Because ultimately, it comes down to, are we going to help them win this war or not? And it is a war, and President Calderon calls it a war. And Mr. Moore, what I'd like to hear from you is what is the Department of Defense doing jointly with the Mexican government to eradicate these dangerous drug cartels? And in closing, I talked about Plan Colombia, and I know, that may not be the model, but I think there are lessons learned from what we did in Colombia that we can be applying in Mexico to help win this war. I know the sovereignty issues are great in Mexico, but I think eventually, in my judgment, the answer is going to be we're going to have a joint intelligence, joint special operations, basically force down there to go after these drug cartels. With that, I'll open it to the two of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Merida initiative is a four-pillar strategy that brings a comprehensive whole-of-government approach to addressing the problems in Mexico. It's an approach that's been carefully negotiated with the Mexican government, who's a full partner in all of its elements. The first pillar is going after the drug trafficking organizations. Those transnational criminals have to be dismantled, and I'm proud to say that our partners in the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense play an important role in that process. We, through the State Department, are providing support to Mexican institutions and strengthening them to take on this challenge more effectively. That's the second pillar of the Merida Initiative. We've trained thousands of police, prosecutors, and judges, and we'll train thousands and thousands more over the course of this year. Strengthening Mexico's institutions is vital to the solution. The resolution rate for crimes, you as a former prosecutor would know in the United States, it's about 90%. When you can bring somebody to trial, you're going to get a conviction, and the ability of the great police, both the state, federal, local, in the U.S. to resolve cases is something we would like to replicate within.
And I hate to, my time's sort of limited. I want the other members to be able to ask questions, but I know all about Merida. Congressman Cuellar does too. We were very involved with that initiative, getting it passed through the Congress, but with only 25%, my judgment, the Department of State has not implemented this plan. And, if that's the strategy, it's failing because we're not winning down there. So this Merida initiative, the way it's being implemented is not working. And it needs to be ramped up, and I hope the State Department will fully implement this plan and the resources that we in the Congress and the American people provided to you. Mr. Moore, can you tell me about the Department of Defense and its role in the Mexican war?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. In addition to the aircraft platforms that I mentioned in remarks, the Bell helicopters, the Black Hawks, and the maritime surveillance aircraft, which we are helping execute as part of Merida. The U.S. U.S.-Mexico Defense Cooperation also includes a number of training, equipment and information exchanges in areas such as tactical and operational skills, all very much in the tactical operational area, night operations, aircraft pilot, and mechanical training, information analysis. These are the kinds of things I can go on and on these particular issues. In addition, and one thing that I did not mention in my opening statement, Mr. Chairman, is that Congress appropriated a little over $5 million in FY10 under FMF to improve SEDENA's special forces rapid reaction teams, night vision capability, that kind of capacity to provide and also provide secure communications as well. So we're executing, we'll be executing that. So those are the areas in which we are plugged in, Department of Defense.
And if I have to, my time is over, but I think we need more of this down there. And I think we got a crisis situation down there, and it's not getting any better. And I don't know who is in charge of the plan, who is in charge of the strategy. Do you coordinate with the Department of State? Do you, are the relevant agencies working together? what is the plan, the strategy? I know Merida is part of it and what you're doing, but who's in charge of this?
Mr. Chairman, we coordinate extensively under the direction of the President and the Secretary through the National Security Staff. Frank and I talk on a very, very frequent basis. He's on speed dial on my phone. We're working on these issues. Let me run through.
And let me say, Secretary Clinton on Foreign Affairs as well, I think she understands this, but the President needs to show leadership on this issue and recognize that we have a serious issue in our backyard and it needs to be dealt with. So my time is way over. And with that, let me recognize the ranking member, Mr. Keating.